Good afternoon, dear YouTube friends. Thanks so much for coming by. Today we are talking kraut. We are making an incredibly simple garlic dill sauerkraut. I can't wait for you to try it. I'm going to show you the best way to eat it too. Keep on watching to see how we do it. Okay guys, we're making kraut, so we obviously need some cabbage. I've got these two gorgeous heads of green cabbage here. My friends Jessie and Nicole have a garden that's just blowing up this year, so they gave me quite a bit of produce, and I thought this would be the perfect way to use up this cabbage. So I'm just pulling off some of the leaves here, about 2 layers worth, just to get down to some unbruised leaves and to get some of that extra dirt off of there. I'm going to do that to both of the heads of cabbage. So once I've got those outside leaves off a little bit, look how cute that little guy is, I'm going to cut them in half and then cut a little V to get that core out of there, because we definitely don't want that in our kraut. I'm just going to pop that guy on out there. Perfect. I'm going to do the same thing to our large head of cabbage. Make sure you've got a pretty sharp knife. These can be pretty hard to cut through, especially when you get a big head of cabbage like this. They're pretty dense. And once we've got our cores out of each head of cabbage, I'm going to give these guys a good little rinse. Make sure we get any of that extra dirt out of there. It'll kind of give us a gritty texture in our kraut if you don't get most of it out. And where we just picked these today, there's definitely a little bit of dirt going on. So now that our cabbage is decored and rinsed off really well, I'm just going to get my little handy dandy scale out here. I'm setting it to grams, and instead of cutting everything up and putting it in a bowl and zeroing it out, I thought, you know what, let's just try to stack them. So we're doing a little zen stack of cabbage here. And we're doing this so we can get our salt ratio just right. So I've got 1,514 grams here. I'm going to write that down, and then I'm going to move on to cutting our cabbage before we get to our salt ratio. So now I'm just going to slice up each half of a head of cabbage, that was hard for me to say, into ribbons. I'm going to try to make it pretty thin. Sped this up a little bit for you. Don't have to watch me slice cabbage for the rest of the afternoon. Once we've got everything cut up into ribbons, I'm going to add them to a really large bowl. You want it to be big enough to be able to move around all your cabbage and knead it almost without it going everywhere. So we're going to plop them into this big bowl here, like so. Now we've got the rest of it going on in. Now remember, we had 1,514 grams of cabbage before we chopped it up. Obviously it's the same after we chop it, but it's a little easier to measure that way in my opinion. And the salt ratio I go with is 2%. So I don't think that there's a wrong percentage, but it is pretty easy to add a little bit too much salt. So I find that the 2% works really well. I got that recommendation from Joshua Wiseman. He has a YouTube channel as well and has a plain kraut recipe. So I'll link that below so you can check his out too. So I'm doing 2% of 1,514 grams, which is just under 31 grams. I took it to 31 just because I didn't want to get crazy with decimals and things like that. This is just kosher salt. Any salt will do. And what the salt does is it's going to, of course, season it, but it's going to help us break down the fibers in our cabbage so it can start to ferment and get krauty. I believe that's a technical term. So here is our giant bowl of cut up cabbage. To that, I'm just going to sprinkle all the salt right over the top. Just kidding. Now I'm going to sprinkle all that salt all over our cabbage, and with super, super clean hands, I'm going to start to knead the cabbage. We're just going to almost like crush it. You want to start to bruise it and break down those fibers. The salt is going to help water or moisture come out of our cabbage, and crushing it is going to help that process kind of happen sooner. So I'm just going to do this exact thing, crush and knead and mix around with my hands until we have got about half that mixture and there's a bunch of liquid in the bottom. So this has been about 5 minutes of kneading. You can see there's some water in the bottom. Everything's broken down. The color's even changed a little bit. It's a little bit more lime greeny. And that's looking perfect. I'm just setting that off to the side and cleaning up our surface a little bit. You want to make sure that everything is clean. All the jars you're using, your hands, surfaces, are really great. If you get something in there, it could turn your kraut a little funky, and not in a good way. So keep your hands clean, keep your utensils and your jars super sanitized, and air dry them until you're ready to use them. I've got this cute little fermentation jar that my mom actually found for me at the DI, but you can get it online. I'll link below how you can get it, but you can absolutely just use regular jars as well. So I'm just packing our cabbage into this jar and realizing that I packed a little bit too much because we are of course making dill pickle kraut, so we need some dill pickle action. So to make our kraut extra dilly and garlicky, I'm going to add, I've got about 4 cloves of garlic that I've halved. I'm going to do about half of those in the middle of our jar here, and about a tablespoon of peppercorns. I'm going to toss those in, and then I've got a 2-ounce package of fresh dill, so I'm taking half of that dill. I've just washed it, and I'm just leaving it on the stem and everything, just pushing that to the sides, plus it's going to look really pretty while it's fermenting. So we're adding about half of that, pushing it down in. And then we're going to add the rest of our cabbage once we've got that in there, and do the same thing with our peppercorns, garlic, and dill. And really the sky's the limit with this. Use whatever flavors you want. You can just make a plain kraut, you could add some spice, you could add some jalapeno. I just really love the dill pickle. Is really versatile and the flavor is amazing. I can literally eat this stuff just right out of the jar. It's so yummy. Pushing that in so we can get all of our cabbage in there. And then once we've got all the garlic and the pepper and the dill and our kraut or our cabbage, we're going to pour in that extra water or moisture that's been released from the cabbage there. And hopefully that'll top off our jar. So you don't get any mold action, you want to make sure that all of your cabbage is covered with liquid. So once we pour that in there, if we need to add a little bit more water, we will. Okay, we're looking pretty good. I'm just adding this little weight here. Keeps everything under. If you use a bigger jar, you can use a small plate inverted to keep everything down. Or this is just a little piece of cleaned plexiglass. It's looking like we could use just a little bit more water, so I'm just going to pour a little bit more just to be safe. So then I'm just going to add my little lid and airlock system. If you're just going to use a regular jar, that's more than fine. Just make sure that you burp the jar every day because the pressure will build up quite quickly. If you have any questions at all about airlock systems, comment below, let me know. I'd be happy to explain it. It's pretty simple. It just makes it so the gas can escape and you still have a good seal on your jar. So I'm just putting that lid on, and I'm going to put our little airlock system that we have put water to the fill line on, and I'm going to take this downstairs actually. It's pretty darn hot in our kitchen these days, so I figure if I put it in the basement, it'll kind of be a little bit cooler and drier. I'm going to keep it down there for about 4 days. I'd say anywhere from 4 to 7 days is a sweet spot, even 3 to 7 days, depending on how krauty you like your kraut. But give it a try after 3 days. See what you think. Leave it for another day if you like it to be a little bit more pungent. But for me and this dill pickle kraut, 4 days seems to be kind of the sweet spot. So it's been 4 days. As you can see, it's definitely, things are happening. There's bubbles, the water's a little bit more murky, things are looking much more krauty, technical term. I'm gonna just take that little weight off there so you can see what this beautiful sauerkraut looks like. Isn't that beautiful? Nice and green, still really, really crunchy and fresh. I'm just going to take it out of our airlock system here and add it to a couple of jars, and we'll keep it in the fridge, and it will stop fermenting, and you can enjoy this for, gosh, it doesn't last a month, but it'll at least last a month in your fridge. The one thing that I do find is you've got the peppercorns, you can totally eat them. They're just a little bit bitter, so it depends on what you think, but sometimes I pick them out. Get those whole garlic cloves, so good. That's our little jar. It's a perfect way to save your cabbage so you don't have to eat all the fresh stuff right away. And just as a little bonus here, I wanted to show you my favorite way to eat sauerkraut, aside from, of course, just eating it out of the jar, from like straight from the fridge. Like standing in front of the fridge, opening the jar, eating it out of the jar is the best way. But if you want to be a little bit more classy about it and make an entire dinner, which I totally understand if you do, this is my favorite way to eat it. Steve and I have got a couple Beyond brats on the grill right now, and I'm just making a giant bed of this kraut right here. You can of course use a bun, but I find it unnecessary. So I kind of like to do a little bit lower on the carbs if I can, as far as bread carbs go. So I've got a big giant pile of this kraut, and I'm going to slice up some of our garden tomatoes along the edges, because who doesn't love a garden tomato, right? And then I'm just gonna load it up with some mustard. I love spicy brown mustard the most, but yellow mustard works just fine. It goes so well with the dill pickle flavor. Something about these plant-based brats with the mustard and the crunch and awesomeness of the sauerkraut. It's like the perfect summer dinner to enjoy outside. Steve and I may or may not have done this about 3 times this week. He loves the brats and the kraut combination as well, so it's like the perfect summer treat for us. So yeah, that's how you make sauerkraut. Super simple. Thanks so much for watching, guys. It's just bonkers that it's already August. I hope that you're enjoying the last of summer and that you're staying safe and healthy, and I can't wait to talk to you soon. Cheers.